Welcome to Fantasy Smack Talk. I'm Dustin. We're heading into week 13. Plenty to talk about as always. And again, this is just a portion of the list. If you click on the link in the description, take you to our website, take you to my write-up where you can see my write-up on all the guys on the list for this week. Let's start at running back with a guy that's been on this list a lot of times for me. I'm still surprised at how few leagues he's owned in, but Kenneth Dixon, only owned in 30% of leagues. He just keeps on getting more and more touches. Terrence West isn't going away. This is going to be a nasty timeshare. But I think Dixon's going to end up being probably the 60 from a 60-40 split. So I think he's going to continue to get more involved, and I think he will have flex appeal from here on out. So I'm kind of surprised he's owned in such few leagues. I do want to talk about two people that I think are worth adding if you're up towards the top of your ranking. So if you're looking at a bye, you need to be thinking about your Week 15 and Week 16 matchups. Go ahead and start looking at, your defenses, your kickers even, but also anyone that you can pick up that might have value. And for me, that's Adrian Peterson and Amir Abdullah. Only on in 45% of leagues and 15% of leagues. I put Peterson above Abdullah just because his overall upside is higher, but it looks like Abdullah might have a better chance of coming back and having an impact this year. But both these guys, if you're up towards the top of the rankings, just stick them on your bench, stash them, see what happens. More than likely, if you're up towards the top, you're not really struggling in terms of your starting lineup. But if one of these guys comes back, they could be an upgrade. So drop one of your bench guys that you're not really planning on using Week 15 or 16 and switch them in with one of these guys who might actually make your lineup. I want to talk about Rex Burkhead for a minute and Hakeem Hunt. Jeremy Hill and Lamar Miller both got hurt Week 12. Early reports are saying they'll probably play Week 13, but you never know as the week goes on. Sometimes the injuries don't respond the way that they think, but Burkhead and Hunt have looked pretty decent in limited touches. So if given the chance to start Week 13, or if you're a Jeremy Hill or a Lamar Miller owner, you might want to think about just handcuffing these guys for as a safety net because Burkhead and Hunt have looked decent, and I do think they could have value if given the chance to start. All right, I want to talk about receivers. Now there's a few receivers this week that are very interesting, and they kind of give you that blow-up potential. First one's Ted Ginn, and here's what I want to say about Ginn. Out of these guys, I think Ginn's actually, it's very close between him and Tyreek Hill. I'll talk about Hill in a second, but the thing I like about Ginn is he's been pretty consistently involved over the last 5 or 6 weeks or so. His floor is actually pretty high at this point, and the big play potential is huge. I mean, we saw what he did Week 12. He can have a good day's fantasy-wise points in one play. So, and he did come on at the end of last year and kind of finish strong for the Panthers last year. So I think Ted Ginn is very much a must-add in all leagues. I don't think this is fluky. I think he's healthy. He's playing great. Panthers are targeting him a lot. Now let's talk about Tyreek Hill. Amazing game. Rushing touchdown, receiving touchdown, return touchdown. Yes, Jeremy Maclin will be back at some point, but for now, Tyreek Hill is looking amazing. And it's tough because it's hard to, how much value do you give these guys? I mean, basically, if your team needs a spark at receiver, he's the guy to get. I mean, him and Ted Ginn, if you can get either one of those guys, they just have such huge big play potential. And even when Maclin comes back, the Chiefs will be crazy not to put the ball in Hill's hands. So at this point, I think he's very much on everyone's radar as a guy that could be breaking out. I mean, the waiver wire in general this year hasn't really produced many studs, and Hill might be the guy that kind of gives you that push down the stretch. So I do think he needs to be owned in all leagues, only owned in 35% of leagues. Tyler Boyd, I think he needs to be owned in all leagues as well, only owned in 55% of leagues right now. AJ Green's probably not playing Week 13. He might not play Week 14. So for now, Boyd is the fantasy receiver you can trust most with the Bengals offense. Tyler Gabriel, I want to talk about him, only owned in about 10% of leagues. Now this is a guy that's going to get added in a ton of leagues, and for good reason. He looked amazing. But I do put him below Hill and Ginn just because I think Gabriel's floor is going to be lower, but the upside's obviously there. When he had those, take a look and go back and watch his touchdowns. He looked like he was at a different speed than everyone else. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Darren Sproles a little bit in terms of just getting the ball in space and just seeing what he can do. So It worries me a little bit just because, if he doesn't break one of those big ones, I don't know if he's going to get the volume as, say, a Ted Ginn or a Hill would get to salvage a decent week. But obviously the big play potential is there. So if you're looking for kind of a dart throw, wide receiver 3-4-ish, I think he's a good guy to go after. Quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, it's for real. I mean, I talked about him a couple weeks ago as a guy that, we need to start putting in the QB1 discussion. And at this point, he is a QB1. And is he going to throw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns? No, but he rushed for 100 yards last week. I mean, that's the equivalent of 250 to 300 passing yards, depending on your league setting. So, even if he's only throwing for 200 yards, but throwing in another 50 to 100 rushing, that's a solid fantasy week, and he has just been scoring a ton of fantasy points. He needs to be respected in more leagues, and if you have like an Andrew Luck or a Russell Wilson or a QB1 that, is still good and someone that you can rely on, you're not necessarily, definitely not starting them every week. I mean, you should definitely consider picking up Collins, starting them over those quarterbacks. So I know it's a little scary putting your fantasy life in the hands of Colin Kaepernick, but he's looked great and his fantasy stats have been amazing. So you can't ignore the rushing yards. They're huge in fantasy for quarterbacks. Tight end Lance Kendricks, I want to talk about him. Only owned in 20% of leagues. I talk about it all the time. Whenever there's a quarterback change, a lot of times the targets get distributed a little bit differently. Now, Kendricks was getting targeted a decent amount before Goff came in, but since Goff's come in, Kendricks has definitely been one of his favorite targets. Young quarterbacks love their tight ends, and I think Goff and Kendricks could be a connection that happens a lot from here on out. So I do like Lance Kendricks as a tight end if you're looking for a tight end. Then my pickup and play defense is going to be San Diego. They're at home against Tampa Bay. Chargers D has looked pretty solid lately. The pick up and play defense options this week aren't all that great. So Chargers at home against Tampa Bay. I don't mind that one. So again, see the full list. Click on the link in the description. Hopefully your all's teams are making the playoffs this year. Brent and I will be back later in the week with more videos. And I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving.